Welcome to Behind the Badge. This podcast aims to improve the health and well-being of frontline workers. Each episode features candid conversations with former and current frontline community members and subject matter experts. Join us as we explore the unique nature of serving in high-risk roles, sharing inspiring stories of resilience, strategies, and resources. We are not qualified health professionals, nor are we aligned with any organization. The opinions expressed in the podcast are solely our own. Additionally, the content may evoke strong emotional responses for some. Listener discretion is advised.
G'day everyone, welcome back to Behind the Badge, where we explore the health, well-being and human stories behind frontline service. Just quickly before we get into it, if you could take 2 minutes out of your day and hit that like, subscribe, follow button on whatever platform you're listening to, leave us a rating, that would help us heaps. We really appreciate it. So today we are joined by Dr. Daniel Higuera. He's a professor and researcher who leads one of California's largest firefighter wellness programs, supporting over 2,000 firefighters every year. Daniel spent years studying the real numbers behind firefighter health, from fitness and hormones to recovery and culture, and what those findings mean for keeping people strong, not only throughout their careers, but beyond them. This is a deep dive into data-driven resilience, redefining what firefighter health really looks like, and how perhaps we can do a little bit better. Let's get into it. Welcome to the show, Neil Higuera.
Thank you for having me.
No stress. Thanks for coming on the show and giving us your time.
All the way from America.
Yeah, whereabouts are you?
I'm in Southern California, where it's sunny and 70 degrees year round.
Wow.
What's that in Celsius?
Oof, I don't have an idea.
Nice. It's nice.
Mate, what we normally like to do is go back to the start of someone's timeline. So if you could maybe share with us where you grew up, how you grew up, and ultimately lead us into what you're doing now in the first responder wellness space.
Sure. Well, I grew up in Los Angeles, in the subsection of Los Angeles called East LA. Then we moved out to I guess you would call it a suburb, place called La Puente. But then grew up there, went to college for my bachelor's, guiding in kinesiology with an emphasis in exercise science. Went for my master's in exercise physiology. And then that's when I started working out in the sport realm. And then fast forward a few years later, I decided I really want to go for my PhD for a multitude of reasons. And when I made that decision, I was already working part-time with the firefighter population. So I had access to about 2,000 firefighters per year. I had about a 30-year data set already established. So it was a no-brainer to do a PhD in the fire population. So all my interest and my employment kind of lined up very well. Fast forward, now I'm finished my PhD in December, and we run one of the biggest health and wellness programs for firefighters in the state.
Wow. So
It's-
there's a little bit in there to unpack. Can we just backtrack? First of all, what drew you into the kinesiology and sports field?
I think I have the answer that 99% of students have is I grew up playing sports. I tear my ACL. I have to go through physical therapy. It looks like a fun profession. You get to work on high school athletes, collegiate athletes, professional athletes. So I started asking my physical therapist all these questions about what his career is like. And he mentioned that he studied kinesiology at a university called Arizona State University. And he told me a little bit more about what the profession is actually like. So that piqued my interest. And I said, cool, I want to do that. And somewhere along the line, when you're doing your bachelor's, I had the same epiphany that 90% of kinesiology students have is, hey, physical therapy is just not that fun. So then I switched realms and I started going more in the strength and conditioning route. And now I started thinking, like, cool, I can still work with athletes, but instead of helping them rehab, now it's how do I get them bigger, faster, stronger to perform instead of more of a rehabilitation setting. And that's how I ended up in more of the sport performance side, no longer for athletes, but now for the firefighter.
How did that sort of juncture point come about? So you said initially you went strength and conditioning for athletics for performance in that field. How did the first responder, I guess,
Uh,
interject into your life?
so did I did an internship with a company called Exos, and they're like a premier sport performance training facility statewide here in the U.S. And so I was working with LA Galaxy, which is a pro soccer team in the States. And I spent a season with them. That didn't go well. Then I went to work with university soccer, and I was there for a season, and that didn't go well either. So then I started working with uh, in the private setting. So think of just your high school collegiate athletes who train in the off season. So I would rent space out of a gym in a city called Pasadena, like where the Rose Bowl's at, and the New Year's parade is happening. So in that city there, and I was training by a private, like by my own private account. I was training athletes there for let's say about 3 to 4 years, doing that, trying to build up my clientele that way. And then I kind of fumbled across the firefighter population because a facility that I was working at part time, they wanted to start up a branch to train the firefighter. So that's where I first got exposure to the fire population. Through some networking, one of the firefighters told me to go talk to a college called Santa Ana College. They have run one of the biggest health and wellness programs for firefighters. So I do. They offer me a part-time job. This is 2017-ish. So they offer me a part-time job doing or performing like these physical battery of tests for the firefighter where we do blood work, EKG, pulmonary work, stress test, etc. And maybe about 2 years after I got my part-time, full-time faculty position opened up, so a professor position opened up. And I said, sure, I'll apply. And I applied eventually, or I guess I did really well because they offered me the position. So that was how I began working full time with firefighters. So now I am a associate professor with Santa Ana College, associate professor of kinesiology with Santa Ana College, embedded within the fire technology program. And within that fire tech program, we have these 18 to 22-year-old kids who are aspiring to be firefighters. So they're taking all their fire science classes and they're trying to join the fire academy so they get their firefighter 1 certification. And then in addition to that, what we do as a program, we also host a health and wellness program for incumbent firefighters. So we work with about 30 different, a little under 30 different fire departments here in Southern California. So total, we have maybe about 2,000 firefighters that go through our program per year. And each one of these firefighters, we do blood analysis on them. So we look at their lipid profiles, metabolic profiles. We're starting to look more at testosterone profiles or hormonal profile, or if you, to be more exact. We look at their VO2 max, their heart health, so through an EKG, a 12 lead. We look at pulmonary, muscular strength, endurance, flexibility, body composition. So that is the entire profile that we build for each one of these individuals on an annual basis. This program has been in existence for about 30 years. So you can imagine the data set that we have. And when we just look at numbers, we can see how the firefighter has really evolved from the 90s to 2000s to 2010s, now into the mid 2020s. So that's a long-winded answer of how I've ended up with fire.
So how you talked about how that evolved. How did it evolve? What were the massive changes that you saw from back then to now?
Oh, so there's a good amount of this stuff. And to be honest, I haven't looked at the entire data set, like in specifics. The stuff that I have looked at is, let's say, body composition has changed a good amount. Fitness levels have changed a decent amount, and I'll go into more specifics. And then I think those are the main 2 things that have really stood out to me. From a body composition standpoint, this was the interesting thing is the firefighter in the 90s. Let's take the median age of the firefighter, which has always been like 35-ish. The firefighter used to be a little chunkier, if you, for lack of better words, right? They were fatter, they were chubbier, their body fat percentage was higher. And as the years have progressed within our program, the firefighter has gotten leaner. And as I ask the different generations of firefighters that we have, so I have the 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds, 50-year-olds. As I asked the 50-year-olds, what was wellness back then when you were on in the 90s? Let's say when you were 20 years old. And they say, well, we didn't really prioritize exercise or fitness. It was a bunch of Vietnam vets that just didn't fit in what their civilian life looked like. So they brought a lot of this, just like this suck it up macho mentality culture, and that's what really reigned in the fire service. And within that culture, it was a lot of smoking, it was a lot of carbs, pastas, your potatoes, your big steaks, and these firefighters were chubbier. And as the years have progressed and the firefighter gets leaner, I asked them what has really motivated that change in the fire department, within your fire department. And they said access to education is programs like us where we go into the stations and the departments and we have lectures on why calories in versus calories out is important, why body fat is so detrimental to health over the long span, and how to really clean up your diet, how to reduce your body fat, how to increase muscle mass. So as that education started reaching the fire departments, then more and more firefighters started making more of these lifestyle changes. Now, fast forward to the mid 2010s, and the firefighter gets a lot leaner. And I would attribute that to now the rise of social media, because now information, we have it at our fingertips. So these younger firefighters that are coming in into the 2010s, and they grew up in the age where they grew up, but they had a lot more access to knowledge on their phone. Um, we now know with, or not even know, but now we have a lot more access to how I can improve my body composition, how I can get more muscle mass, how I can drop more fat mass. So education and knowledge is a lot more accessible. And I believe those are kind of a multitude of influences for why we have a healthier firefighter today. Now, I'm going to add an asterisk to this because we are a wellness program that has been working with these fire departments for multiple years now. So within the population that we have, these firefighters are healthier, they're leaner. As I compare data that's being published like in the Midwest of our departments in their southern states, the we don't or at least I don't see those same patterns. The firefighters in the Midwest and the southern states, they are chubbier. Their body fat is higher. And I would also attribute that to a lack of education that's reaching these fire departments, like specifically for the firefighter. So add a kind of fun little data point on this one is the NFPA, the National Fire Protection Association. They release health and wellness data every 5 years. So it's like a needs assessment for the American fire departments. Every 5 years they release this report. The last time they released this was 2021. I think it was the last year it was published. And more than 70% of US fire departments did not have a health and wellness program. So they don't have any experts in their own domain going to the firefighter and saying, hey, your profession is really taxing, both from a hormonal perspective, physiological, cognitive, and based on how demanding your profession is, we should adapt nutrition by these means. We should adapt training, recovery, etc. So the individual firefighter, it's up to them to now start Googling and YouTubing and finding resources on their own, so how to maintain and take care of their own health. And that just adds an extra layer of a challenge to the everyday firefighter in the departments that don't have access to a health and wellness program, like the departments that we work with. So I think that would explain that asterisk of why our members are a lot healthier compared to departments that don't have a wellness program.
Wow. So basically, what you're saying is that like that health and wellness program can be attributed directly to having healthier members within the fire department. And as a flow on from that, does that mean that there's less injury and less time off work? And are you seeing with that improvement in health, a reduction in claims and costs downstream from injuries and things like that?
So within our data ourselves, we do not have that information. So although we collect injury data, it's not very robust injury data. It's a questionnaire that says, do you have any previous injuries? Yes, no, list. Do you have any current injuries? Yes, no, list them. So it's a handwritten form. So it makes it a lot more difficult to start building these patterns between the health of a firefighter as it progressed on year by year, and then the injury data. So within our data ourselves, I cannot tell you that with confidence. However, when I look at other published data within LA County, or at least the LA greater area, Los Angeles greater area, and there's data being published on departments that don't have a wellness program that then ties health of the firefighter over to injury risk and how much the dollar cost per injury claim is, it's higher for the departments that don't have a wellness program. So although I can't tell you with confidence with our internal members, I could tell you with confidence of the data that has been published that it does lead to some positive outcomes in terms of reducing your overall workers' comp claims and therefore your dollar amount invested in that.
Yeah, I imagine in a world where everyone wants to see if we invest this much into a health and wellness program, what are we going to get out of it? What's the return on investment? How do we measure that? Is probably a challenge or perhaps a question that you get asked a fair bit.
Yeah, so there's been a few studies that I can think off the top that actually put a dollar amount to it. So if you invest for every dollar you invest, and I don't remember the exact number, so I'm gonna speculate a little bit here. So I may be wrong. Is for every dollar you invest, you would get like $2 or $2.50 back from a injury perspective. But then from an absentee perspective, meaning how many days the injured firefighter is taking off, and therefore how much backfill that department has to do, that dollar amount has almost gone exponentially up. So for every dollar you would invest in a wellness program, then you would end up saving like $6 to $8 from the absentee perspective. Now again, those numbers may be off by a dollar or two. I would have to double check, but nonetheless, it's a figure somewhere in that realm there.
Wow, that's a good return, a good incentive to implement health and wellness programs.
Absolutely.
You mentioned before, your the firefighters underneath your program are healthier, the higher fitness levels, body composition's better, they're leaner. What are some of the advantages to being that way inclined rather than the chubbier guys and girls from the 90s?
So I can answer this from a multitude of perspectives. Let's try to explore each route here. Uh, from a just body weight perspective, we're not discriminating between the quality of that body weight. We're just looking at the number on the scale. The lighter firefighter has a harder time. I don't say harder time. They have to put out a lot more, meaning they have to work at a higher heart rate when they have the gear on, plus tools, and they're on air because they're carrying, let's say, 60 to 80 pounds. Let's say that converts that to 30 to 40 kilos of gear, both from their bunker gear, tools, and mask, and the bottle on. So, from just a body weight perspective, lighter firefighters do have to work at a higher heart rate. So then you would make the argument that, well, maybe I have to be heavier in order to do my job more robustly. But then we start splitting it up, the body composition, and now it's no longer weight on the scale. Now we're looking at muscle mass versus fat mass. So how much body fat percentage you have. And although leaner firefighters, meaning number on the scale is lighter, but more muscle mass, these individuals can go through occupational, like duties or responsibilities with a lot more ease. One, because strength, they have functional muscle mass to help them carry, climb, descend, throw, pull, etc., as opposed to another firefighter who's the same weight, but it has more fat mass. So they have non functional mass. So now they're just carrying a bunch of extra weight, body fat that doesn't attribute or contribute to their occupational duties. So we can start looking at it from that perspective on an occupational performance realm. But then we start looking at it from a health perspective in terms of longevity. And this is where the data set really begins to really shine here, is that this is probably stuff that your listeners have heard multiple times. You guys and the rest of the members at your department have probably know really well already is body fat is detrimental to your health. Is in your 20s and 30s, you can be overweight and obese, and you may not see too much of an impact on your internal health, meaning your blood pressure, your cholesterol may not necessarily reflect unhealthy for those who are overweight and obese. But by the time that you're in your 40s and you've been doing this job already for 10 years and you've been overweight for 10, 15 years, now your blood pressure catches up to you, your cholesterol starts to demonstrate more of a shift towards the negative side, your injury risk really begins to outpace itself there. So when we look at the biggest injury risk factors in firefighters, besides age, is body fat. So fatter individuals have a higher risk of injury and lower levels of fitness. So put it all together, firefighters who are older have higher levels of body fat and lower levels of fitness, meaning VO2 max, their risk of injury is exponentially higher compared to your even their older firefighter, but who is lean and has high levels of VO2 max. So that's where the disparity in body composition, specifically body fat, really begin to shine. One, occupational performance, but two, internal health, especially getting into your 40s and 50s.
Reading some reports on the might have been the NFPA or the what's the other one?
NSRI?
NSRI. One of the biggest killers in firefighters was a cardiac arrest. So, pretty much all links into what you're talking about. Is that still those numbers now that you've with the newer generation that you're dealing with? Is that changing? Is that risk coming down? Or
So something interesting is happening in the fire service, at least what we're noticing on our side here in Southern California, is as the new generation is entering the workforce, the comments that I get from the veteran firefighter, these are the guys who've been on for 10, 15 plus years, is the new generation of firefighters, so Gen Z, that they're not as healthy. So their levels of fitness are lower. They're coming in with lower levels of fitness. They're coming in with higher levels of body fat. And then they make the comment of, well, they just don't want to work anymore. So although that may be true for some population of the Gen Z, they don't want to work anymore, what certainly is unfortunately a pattern is levels of fitness are lower now in the Gen Z population, and levels of body composition are higher, or body fat are higher in the Gen Z. So although that trend that we talked about earlier, that the 90s firefighter was fatter compared to now the 2010 firefighter, the 2020 firefighter who's coming in, we're noticing more of a shift towards the opposite direction. And as I ask the questions is, why do you think that is? So I'm not looking at data yet. I'm just interviewing our members here, our veteran members. A lot of them are attributed to the lack of physical fitness that the young generation is growing up with, because technology was available since at a very young age for them. So as my generation and the olders, we were going outside and playing with our friends from elementary all the way to high school to college. The young generation is still playing with their friends, but they're connecting online to do that. Um, so how much has that influenced body fat levels and fitness levels once that young 22-year-old firefighter is applying for the fire departments? So that's an interesting trend there on that end. How do we address it? That's a challenge for all of us to figure out, really. I'm sorry, I lost scope of the question you asked me. What was the original question?
Just the differences of those percentages of, cardio issues in the fire service was the biggest killer in firefighters, you know, has
Yes.
that decreased now with this, the wellness programs but obviously with the newer generation, perhaps not.
So on a nationwide scale, the NFPA every year they also release injury data, and they release I forget the name of the report, but it's a fatality report, and they report how many injuries were reported. So these are injuries that are reported. And last time they released this report was 2023 or 2024. I think 2023, and it was like 68,000 injuries that were reported. The main cause of injury was musculoskeletal injury, or the main outcome of the injury was musculoskeletal injury, but the main cause of that injury was cardiovascular strain. So it's a very vague term, and it's up to me and you to add the interpretation to it. So that cardiovascular strain means that you are exerting past whatever level that your body is able to do comfortably and with minimal risk. So now this firefighter who has low levels of fitness, they're putting out on a fire on whatever call that they're on that they have to exert themselves on. And either their heart or their body isn't healthy enough to maintain that level of exertion. So that is one side of it. The other side of it is cardiac related injuries, so cardiac events. And cardiovascular disease remains one of the top leading causes of mortality for the firefighter, fortunately. This is nationwide data, of course. Up there with it now is cancer and unfortunately mental health, suicide. So those three are kind of top contenders for or for the leading cause of death in the firefighter. Now that's nationwide. Zoom in to just our program alone, and we we are fortunate enough that our program has put out a good enough product and service where our firefighters still challenged with cardiovascular disease, high levels of body fat, hypertension, and dyslipidemia, so high cholesterol. But the degree of which that is elevated, it's not near what departments that don't have a wellness program on. So we can conclude with a degree of confidence, of certainty that the longevity, the lifespan of the firefighter within our wellness programs are longer or of higher quality. So hopefully these individuals are able to finish out their career in a healthier state and therefore retire and enjoy their retirement years. And that's the ultimate goal, really.
Yeah, we, see people retire out, and unfortunately, not long after that, they're suffering, major health issues or
Mm,
unfortunately passing away, and not enjoying those later part of their life after service. So if we can set them up for success to
mm.
transition out and be a bit healthier, that would be ideal, obviously.
'Cause retirement age in the States is at 55?
So in California, I just made a post about this today. In California, prior to 2013, the retirement age, at least the retirement system that we have here in California, it's called PERS, CalPERS, and it was 3% at 50. So in order to peak your retirement, you had to get to the age of 50. And then it changed to 3% at 55. And now post 2013, the retirement age peaks at 57. So it's now 2.7 at 57. So for a firefighter who earned $100,000 per year, making up rough numbers here, a firefighter who earned $100,000 per year, at the end of their career at 57, they would pension out with roughly about $68,000 per year annually. That is down from like, I think it was in the high 70s, maybe low 80,000 for the 3% at 50 group. So now the firefighter has to work longer into their 50s for a lower pension. The motivation for why the retirement system changed, that is beyond me. But the challenge that is now upon us is how do we keep the firefighter healthier longer into their 50s? And as we talked about earlier, is the older firefighter, just because of the biological clock, they're at higher risk of musculoskeletal injuries, higher risk of cardiac events. They don't recover as quickly, both physically, physiologically, and cognitively. So now these individuals who were able to retire at 50, now they have to do the job for 7 more years. And how do we make their body resilient and robust enough to be able to do that? That's going to be the challenge.
Vastly different to us in Australia. We don't have any of those sort of pension schemes, and we go through to 65.
Cool. So I've been getting some comments on the post that I put out today, and individuals are commenting that the retirement in Canada is 60. For other places in Canada is 65. UK is 65. So I'm reading these comments. I'm like, oof, I guess the California firefighter still has it better than these other individuals.
I guess on that, you said you work with 30 odd different fire departments. Imagine you get to see a spectrum of different cultures and different ways of doing things. How much of an impact does the culture have on the uptake of your program and on the downstream side of that? Does that affect the overall health and well-being of the firefighters?
Yes. So we have departments that are as small as 50 members and as big as 300 and something members. So the department size varies drastically. And within each department, although like the personality and the culture of the firefighter is the same across the profession, the morale within every department influences how the member at each department really perceives our program. I'll give you an example. Is we have one department who's maybe, let's say, 60 to 80 members wide, somewhere around there. Let's go 90 members, somewhere around that space there. And they love our program. We're out there almost monthly, either doing some sort of hands-on workshop, some sort of educational lecture in the classroom. We are running a fitness test for them, so that EKG at the 12 lead with the pulmonary tests, flexibility, strength. We are interpreting these results for them. So we're out there pretty often. And these individuals are always engaged with us. They're asking us questions or they're very attentive to the information that we're bringing. They embrace the information really well. Their leadership is also present on these workshops and these lectures. So their leadership is leading by example in this case. They're saying, hey, I'm 55 years old and I'm still here. You, 25-year-old, yes, you're healthy, but I want you here too. So that we and then we look at these in this department's data and they're healthier. Their fitness levels are higher, their body compositions are lower, their VO2 max are higher on average. Then we go to another department. Membership is maybe in the 150s-ish. The way that me, the outsider, when I come to their department, the way I can kind of tell and just feel that the morale is off is when I am in a lecture room, like in their training room, and there's a bunch of blue uniforms in there. Let's say there's 15, 20 blue uniforms, and then there's one or two black uniforms here. So now we're talking battalion chiefs and higher. And usually, when it's just all blue uniforms and morale is high, all the guys are bantering. They're talking shit back and forth. They're engaging with me. They're joking around with me. So you can palpate that morale, that energy. Now with the departments where the black uniforms are in the room and it's quiet, nobody's bantering, nobody's talking back and forth. I get very little to no engagement, meaning I just get guys in the back of the classroom sitting down with their arms crossed. Um, that is kind of one of the telltale signs for me that the guys on the floor, or at least the captains and below, they don't feel comfortable being in rooms with admin, with brass. And that's what I notice as a spectator on the outside. Then after the class or the lecture's over, I usually have one or two guys that stay and they either ask a very individualized question or they give me, for lack of better words, they give me some gossip of what's going on in the department. It's like, it's just this chief, and they start with the reasons why the chief is not good for the department, and how it's influenced the department in a poor way, where you notice that a lot of members have begun lateraling over to other departments because of just culture has gone in the wrong direction. Then you look, so that's what I notice as a spectator. Then I go in and I look at their data as a department, and we have very little participation. Is at a membership of roughly 130, 150, we have maybe a third that participates. And that is a telltale sign that our program isn't either it's not welcomed or it's not supported by the membership at large, or it's not supported by leadership at large. It can be any one of those reasons. So that's me speculating a little bit and grabbing onto some clues here and there.
Is there any fire departments that you work with that make either your program or, say, physical assessments or physical activity mandatory, or and do you see any differences in health there?
So we have 2 departments, recently 3, that have some sort of mandatory like participation. 2 of those departments are incentivized monetarily. So although it's a voluntary program, the majority of the members are participating because of the financial incentive. One of those 3 departments don't have a financial incentive, but now there's a almost a mandatory aspect to it, whereas you have to participate. And they give options as to what degree of participation you you choose. So I'll give you an example of that one department that's not incentivized. We have a graded exercise stress test on a treadmill that uses a Bruce protocol. On that Bruce protocol, you have to get 12 to 12 and a half minutes to ensure that you have a VO2 max of at least 42 milliliters per kilogram per minute, which is the minimum recommended standard, quote unquote, that the NFPA outlines. So this department says you either do 12 and a half minutes on the treadmill, or you can do a PAT test. Here in the States, we call it, well, one of them is a BIDL. It's kind of the most recognized one here in California. And as I talk to my followers online, turns out the BIDL is used across many different states. So it's a PAT test. So you either have to do the treadmill test or the PAT test, you choose, but you have to do one of them. And then you look at the incentivized programs, the one that says, hey, we'll pay you if you participate one, and then you'll get another tier compensation if you meet a certain benchmark. So then you then would think that the incentivized department, their health is going to be greater than the non-incentivized department. And I have not looked at this data very robustly, but there was one publication that we put out maybe about 7, 8 years ago where it discussed the onset of that incentive program for this department in specific is when the program first incentivized this wellness program. Yes, health metrics of the everyday firefighter, the everyday firefighter at this department did improve. And that novelty lasted roughly about 5 years. After that 5-year mark, the health kind of just plateaued for that department. And then when we compare the health of these incentivized departments versus the non-incentivized departments, the health is almost equal. So there's not much of in the mathematics world, the statistical world, is they call it not a not statistical difference between the two. Meaning if you would to play a chance game, there's less than a 5% chance that the incentivized firefighter is healthier than a non-incentivized firefighter. So what does this mean? Does it mean that the incentive doesn't work? I would argue that that's not the case. It's how the incentive is structured. So the way that we've structured the incentive is outcome based, meaning to meet the benchmark, so you can get your tier 2 incentive is you have to do, let's say, 40 push-ups. So after 40 push-ups, there's no more incentive. You've checked off the box. And it's the same explanation for other metrics like a plank, like grip strength, like the VO2 max test is in order for you to get the top tier incentive, this is a score you have to reach. So once you reach that score, many firefighters say, I'm done. I already reached it. Now take that benchmark away to the non-incentivized fire departments, and it's no longer 40 as the max. Now it's do as much as you can. So these individuals, they push to as much as they can, not even knowing that other departments are capping out that incentive or that benchmark at 40. So when you compare it on that scale, then you can start making the conclusion of, oh shit, the non-incentivized department has higher levels of fitness and push-ups, but it's not because they're healthier. It's because the incentive is structured in a way where the the incentivized fire department doesn't have a reason to go past the benchmark. So that's how the data really chops down to.
So would you say that I guess a deduction from that might be it probably comes down to the education and the culture and driving for want of a better word, like a competition or performance culture rather than like that incentivization model?
So if I could have it my way, so this is now Daniel's opinion. This is separate from my employer. Is that I would structure the incentive. It wouldn't be outcome based, but it'd be progression based. So I'll give you an example. If you have a shoulder injury and you are rehabbing that shoulder, so now your push-ups, you can only do 20 because of actually let's take the injury out of it. Let's say you just have poor levels of fitness and you can only do 20 push-ups. You see the benchmark at 40 and you say, there's no way I'm going to do 40. I'm not even going to try on this one. So that discourages the attempt to get to 40. So that is an outcome-based incentive, as opposed to a progress-based incentive is year one, you can only do 20. Next year, and let's say if you can do 30, then you will meet the next incentive tier. So now the carrot is always achievable. It's always attainable, as opposed to putting the carrot way over there, and there's no way you're going to be able to meet that. So that way, my chubby firefighter, my low fitness, my low strength, my low whatever metric we're quantifying still has a chance and still has the motivation to put out and to try to reach the next benchmark because it's attainable. So if I had it my way, I'd be more of a progress based incentive instead of an outcome based incentive.
Interesting. Interesting.
Very.
Mate, we've spoken about physical attributes and physical health and well-being. How does the physical health and fitness link into you mentioned cancer and mental health. Is there any links between your physical well-being and those other two illnesses?
So if we think of the main ailments, the main health and wellness challenges in every fire department, I'm going to argue that you can chop it down to 5 different ones. And as I'm going through these, if you guys can reflect to the challenges in your department, they're all going to somehow come down to cardiovascular disease, injuries, sleep, mental health, and I'm blanking on one. Cardiovascular disease, cancer, mental health, sleep. I'm blanking on this 5th one. It's gonna come back to me. Injuries. Did I say injuries already?
Did he? No.
First time around you did.
All right. Let's try this. Let's try this again. Cardiovascular disease, injuries, mental health, cancer, sleep. Those are the 5. So every issue that's health and wellness related for the firefighter, it's gonna come down to those 5 somehow, some way. Out of those 5, which one of those has the biggest sphere of influence to all the other ones? Before I tell you guys, do you guys have a wild guess of which one would have the greatest impact
Sleep.
on any of them?
Sleep.
Sleep. So when we look at sleep, for those who are sleep deprived, if we just talk sleep deprivation over one shift. Now, this is data that was not in firefighters. This is general population data. For those who are sleep deprived, and you can define sleep deprivation as less than 4.5 hours of sleep. This is for the study. This is how they defined it. Less than 4.5 hours of sleep. When they measure the caloric intake on a sleep deprived state versus a well rested state, the sleep deprived individuals were over consuming calories by roughly about 350 calories, specifically coming from carbs and your fats. So this is over one night of sleep deprivation. Now, compound this over weeks, months, and your entire career of sleep debt. How much of that has contributed to your increase in body fat across your career? Now, with an increase in body fat, how much does that contribute to your injuries? How much does that contribute over to your cardiovascular disease? How much does that contribute over to your mental health? How much does that contribute over to your risk of cancer? So you can see how sleep impacts one thing, diet. Diet will then impact so many other things. So the web starts to really spread its tentacles through so many other things. Now, that's one side of the equation. Now, sleep. Now you're chronically sleep deprived. And you guys see as much as human trauma that you guys see. And for the everyday firefighter, you ask them and they say, I can handle this. I'm okay with this. This is what I signed up with. But then the way that you heal from that, the way that you process that cognitively, psychologically, it begins to get compromised with your sleep depth over chronic periods of time. Now, add another layer to this where you are constantly doing or you're constantly working overtimes, whether they're voluntary or forced overtime. So now you are working a lot more than you usually would, and you're responding to a lot of these human trauma calls, and maybe 80% of your calls are EMS. Let's say, I don't know, 50% of those EMS calls are something that they probably shouldn't have called 911 for. So all these kind of tiny stressors just start to compound. And then overall, you start developing this like lack of empathy. And that over 10, 15, 20, 30 years, you can see how it can start impacting your guys' mental health from there. And at the extremes of that, where we can no longer cope with these stressors, whether they be anxiety stressors, depression like stressors, then unfortunately we see a lot of suicide like ideations. So then we start exploring how sleep is impacting mental health. And then we start looking at other metrics as well, is those who are sleep deprived, their motivation to exercise that next day, unless their discipline is really down tight, they're fatigued, they're tired. What are the chances that they want to put out on a high intensity workout? What are the chances that they do want to lift some heavy weights? So then now firefighters with lower levels of fitness, we can measure that by VO2 max. And this is what some of my dissertation data showed, is lower level firefighters with lower levels of VO2 max had higher levels of PTSD symptomology. So you start seeing how these webs are really all intertwined. So to give you a little bit more context of what my dissertation, my doctorate data showed, is I looked at what sleep profiles look like, recovery through HRV, PTSD symptomology, body fat, and VO2 max. What that profile looked like for firefighters in the busy stations, the moderately busy stations, and then the slow stations. And you would think that the firefighter at the slower station, they have more time to eat healthier. They have more time to exercise. They wouldn't get disrupted as much with the tones with the calls after midnight. And therefore, you would think they're healthier. So I ran this data and I controlled for age, because usually the older guys usually end up at the slower stations. So taking age out of it, age is no longer an influencer here. Firefighters were across the board, whether you were at the slow, moderate, or the busy station, they all had shitty sleep. They were all sleeping less than 5 hours. So then this is where the interpretation comes in, is why is my firefighter at the slow station, who's running an average about 5 to 6 calls per shift, compared to the firefighter at the busy station, who's running an average about 15 to 16 calls per shift, why is the sleep equally as bad across the board? So then you start looking at other things that are not tones related. So these are like environmental noises. These are individuals who may not have dorms and they hear their colleague, their fellow firefighter snoring. They're hearing footsteps. They're hearing the toilet flushing. Let's take environmental noises out of it. Now it's just that anticipatory response is, I know a tone's going to go off at 11 p.m. I know I'm going to get a call at 2 p.m. So is it even worth me going to bed? Because it would really suck to get toned out when I'm in deep sleep. So like that hypervigilance, it's present whether you're running 5 calls per shift or 15 calls per shift. So if the everyday firefighter is just sleep deprived because of that response there, then you start seeing how chronic sleep debt across a 30-year career impacts your mental health, your motivation, your want, your desire to exercise, your impact on your nutrition, whether you're consuming low enough calories or you're over consuming 350 calories on average from your carbs and your fats. So you see how the scope is so much of a greater, bigger issue here. And that's the unfortunate challenge for the firefighter.
Mm.
So, that is the unfortunate challenge because those night shifts have to be worked. Just for a bit of context for us here in Australia, we do very different shift patterns to you guys in the States. So we're predominantly a 10-14 shift pattern. So 2 10-hour days, 2 14-hour nights, and then 4 days off, which is around a 48 hours in 4 days. We've got a couple of departments here on 24s, but we're predominantly that 10-14. But even so, we got those 2 night shifts in a row. What is the answer to that? Like, how long does it take to recover? What does recovery look like? And what did you find through your research?
So when we look at recovery, so my data only looked at recovery after one 24-hour shift. I did not continue looking into the next 24 after that. However, there is a paper that got published 2017 that did look at how long it took the firefighter to recover after one 24-hour shift. And these individuals, this research group, they were tracking recovery through HRV, through a wearable. And after one 24-hour shift, that first day off, there was essentially no recovery. Is they spent that whole day being under recovered. Their body is trying to get back down to their baseline levels of recovery. After that second day off, then they started making significant improvements towards recovery, but they were not back to their baseline yet. After that third day off, so that 72, that's when you actually reached full levels of recovery. So here we can speculate for every 1 day on, you would need at least minimum 2 days off to reestablish your circadian patterns, if you will. And again, we only used, or not we, but this research group only used HRV on this one. And also a limitation to this, it was a small sample size. I think there was like 14, less than 20 participants for this one study here. So off of that small data set, you have to extrapolate it over to the firefighter population at large. Is that for every 1 day on or 24 hours on, you would need roughly about 2 days, ideally 3 days off to get your full recovery. So this, when I put this data out, I posted this on my Instagram earlier on 2025, and I get a message from James Gearing, and he says, I need to interview you because this data really helps support the transition for a lot of departments going to 24/72s that then supports that 1 day on, 3 days off ideally. So that has been one of the data sets that has really helped add support to this shift to the 24/72s. But again, just one study of 14 participants. fire departments, firefighters, you take that data and do what you will with it. Yeah, because it's only 14. It's really hard to say. Because of these 14, everybody else will respond the same.
Is there a lot of research into the job and our sleep and our recovery and things like that that we can tap into?
What do you mean?
Well, I'm just wondering if there's a large amount of research out there that you can leverage to sort of justify decisions, or like you said with James jumping on that research of only 14 participants. Is there like a depth of research out there into firefighter specific topics?
So there is a good amount, a lot of data on how sleep deprivation on the firefighter is impacting all these qualities of health. Uh, but that's as much as we have for sleep on the firefighter. We know all the negatives. So then it begs a question, what do we do? There are one, maybe two, maybe three studies that I can think off the top that has tried to address this to, I don't say solve because you can't really solve this issue, but at least improve the sleep health of a firefighter. And it really, though, as much technology and advancements and prescriptions and drugs and interventions that we have in the space, the stuff that we have used in the fire space is sleep hygiene. Is when you guys are on duty, we cannot medicate you guys so you guys can sleep better for obvious reasons. So we can't give you this prescription, this peptide, this something, because you guys have to wake up when the tones go off. So the question is not on duty. The question is not how do I get you to sleep better? The question is how do I get you to fall asleep quicker? So if I would ask you guys, when you guys are on duty working a night shift, actually, let me ask more specific questions so I can get better educated on this. When you guys do work the night shift, are you guys going to bed or are you guys just staying out the entire night shift?
Going to bed.
So then what time is average bedtime for you guys working night shift?
10,
10.
10:30.
Let's say it's 10:30. How long does it take you guys to fall asleep? Rough time.
Hour.
Oh, all right, you're on the high end. So when we look at what they call sleep latency in the firefighter, from the time that they go to bed, let's say 10:30, to the time that they fall asleep, that time span, sleep latency, is roughly about 20 to 30 minutes. So now the tones go off, and you have to get up and go do what you do. Let's say it's a bloody nose call, something you guys can turn around in 20 minutes. So you guys respond to the call, come back to the station. How long does it take you guys to fall asleep now?
Even longer.
And that is the response across the board. Is if it took me 20 minutes the first time, it's now taking me 40 to 60 minutes the second time. But let's say that call was a full working call. It's a full cardiac arrest. It's a 2 alarm fire. And you guys clear the call however long it took you guys. Let's say an hour or two. Now you guys are back to the station. How long does it take you guys to fall asleep now?
Even longer.
What do you guys
again.
got?
Even longer again.
Longer.
Yeah, because you guys are now like fully alert. You guys are fully awake for you guys to ramp and unwind from that peak level of cognitive physical exertion. The time is much longer. So that hour that you spend in bed trying to go back to bed, that's time wasted. So the interventions that we have tried, when I say we, the scientific community, the interventions that we have tried is sleep hygiene, is stay off your phones, don't consume your stimulants, your caffeine, your nicotines, X amount of time before bedtime, a cold room, pull the black shades on. So all these different checkbox items that you can do. Out of that sleep hygiene, I think one of them is going to be the main driver, which is breath work. So breath work is a conscious, direct path to me now stimulating my parasympathetic nervous system, which is my switch from my sympathetic fight or flight over to my rest and digest parasympathetic. So one of the main drivers behind that is something called the vagal nerve. And I can stimulate that vagal nerve, one, subconsciously or unconsciously, I guess whatever the correct term is, but I can also do it consciously by me controlling my breath. And there's a multitude of different breathwork patterns out there, but some simple ones are like box breathing, where you inhale to try to fill up your diaphragm for 4 seconds, hold for four, exhale for 4 seconds as if you're trying to fog up your bathroom mirror, hold for four, and then repeat that pattern. So one cycle of that is 16 seconds. Repeat that pattern for a minute, and you're going roughly around 6 to 8 breaths per minute. Now that slowing down your breath rate stimulates that vagal nerve, or that vagal nerve called now just vagal tone, and then starts decreasing your heart rate and your blood pressure, and starts getting you in a more at a better state to actually fall asleep in. So if we can really leverage this tool, it's not a sexy tool, but if we can really leverage this and teach the everyday firefighter, hey, this is some way that you can fall asleep instead of in 30 minutes in 15, instead of 60 minutes in 30, then you can see how this impact can have, or this reduction in sleep latency can now start having some compound effect for the betterment of the firefighter across many different domains. At least that's my theory. I don't have data to support this yet, but that is my theory here, my thesis.
I'm glad you brought that up, Daniel, because for the last probably week, I've been studying the vagal nerve and the parasympathetic, sympathetic. It started out with the mouth tape for sleep apneas and things like that. Listening to was a book that one of our
Oh, Breath by James Nestor.
breath by James.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, got into that, which led me down this rabbit hole of YouTube stuff, which got to the vagal nerve. So I find it really interesting, and the devices they're talking about, clipping on the ear, that pulsating, they call it the vagal nerve stimulators or something. So yeah, I'm currently reading right into it. So the breath work seems to be
That's
Yeah, that is the one tool that we have that we can consciously leverage to start switching our nervous system from that sympathetic to that parasympathetic response.
mm,
well, that just comes back to a bit of education as well.
That is one of the books that I'm currently reading on sleep disorder medicine. Sleep disorder medicine, and it's talking about all the different sleep disorders out there. And there's a bunch of them, but the one that relate to firefighters the most, like insomnia, sleep apnea, and a lot of this is treatable, especially the sleep apneas. So if we can start making some dents in this space, I think we can improve sleep health for the everyday firefighter. We won't be able to solve it, but we can improve it.
It's funny you say that because that is what I do every night shift.
Mm.
I'll go to my dorm and I'll stick YouTube on and a quick 10-minute, 15-minute thing, and I'm out, lights out by the end of it.
Mm.
It works really, really well for me anyway.
Yeah, and then throw in your wearables, like now the adaptation of wearables, like the everyday civilian has a wearable, whether it's a Fitbit, Apple, Garmin, what have you, and they're more in tune to what your own physiological metrics look like. So then now you have a better idea. Is like, oh, look, my breath rate when I'm sleeping is 6 to 7, but when I'm awake and ambulatory, I'm in the 10s to 15s. So that means if I can bring my breath rate down to the low single digits, can this facilitate sleep onset? My thesis is yes. So then now instead of me talking more abstract of saying, hey, try to get your breaths per minute to 7, now I can be more specific and say, you as an individual, looks like your ideal breath rate when you're sleeping is roughly about 5. Let's try to get it down to that through these different breath work techniques. So now things start to get a lot more individualized. And then with the rise of like Aura, Apple has it now. There's a bunch of YouTube videos on this, and the app called Calm and Headspace. They have audio guided meditative exercises, which are 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 15 minutes. So instead of being on our phone, is throw that audio on, and if I'm following this guided meditation, which is breath work and mindfulness, like the cognitive side of it, how much quicker can I fall asleep? and I'm willing to bet is much faster.
Noting that out of those big five that you mentioned between cardiovascular, injury, cancer, sleep, and mental health, sleep is that first domino that sort of affects the rest of them. If somebody was listening to this and they wanted to, I guess, improve their health and fitness in this industry, would that be the number one takeaway, is to maybe just go and try a little bit of breath work to try and reduce that sleep latency?
Yes, I would say double down on your sleep hygiene. That would be one of the lowest hanging fruits. And the other one on the sleep health is our circadian rhythm. One of the things that really ground it is our sleep and our wake time. And so we as diurnal creatures, we sleep at night and we ambulate throughout the day. When that becomes disrupted, it has a cascade of effects on our hormonal health, cognitive health, physiological health, etc. So then for the firefighter they essentially live two different lives. They have an on-duty life and an off-duty life. And their on-duty life, their circadian rhythm is just completely dysregulated. It's completely disrupted for obvious reasons. So for me to tell them, hey, you have to have a constant constant bedtime and wake time, that is not attainable. But what is attainable is half of that recipe, which is a constant bedtime. Is there is kind of this conditioning aspect to us humans where if we set a routine, my body, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, I will my body will react to whatever that routine is. So I give you a easy example is when 1, 2, 3 o'clock rolls around, the everyday firefighter, they have a cup of coffee in hand. Is it because they need it, like they need that caffeine boost, or is it just habit at this point? It's just, it's 1 o'clock. I usually have a coffee around this time, whether we're consciously thinking about it or not. It's just a thing that we do. So then add that same kind of conditioning to now the sleep aspect. Is I know I'm gonna go to bed at 10:30, irrespective if I'm sleepy or not. I'm gonna go to bed, and in bed, I'm not gonna be on my phone. I'm gonna read a book. I'm gonna do my breath work, whatever it is. And maybe the first couple weeks or month, it's tough because 10:30 is not your average bedtime. But then with time, let's say after a month or so, that habit forms, and now you just start getting sleepy at 10:30. So you've kind of primed and conditioned your body to want to sleep at this time. Whether the tones go off or not, that's a completely different story. But half of the equation is try to standardize as much as we can that circadian rhythm. We can't control your wake up time. Can we control your sleep time, your bedtime? I'm willing to bet as well that if we can standardize half of that equation, we can also start making some progress towards improving your sleep health overall. So, two things that the everyday firefighter can take home after watching this episode here is choose a bedtime and uh, adopt some breath work. Find some techniques that is suitable for you that you enjoy. Find the app that's going to help you, that's going to help guide you through this methodology, whether it's the YouTubes or the Headspace or Calm or Aura Ring, they all have it, and give that a try for a month. What do you have to lose?
So they're still talking about that around about the 8 hours rule of thumb for sleep a night.
Say that again.
So they still talk about the 8 hours time frame for sleep. That's the best sort of figure to have, 8 hours a night?
Yes. So when we look at the need for sleep as we age, your infants, they're sleeping 14, 16 hours, and they are growing and developing at a very fast rate. And during sleep is when we secrete the majority of our growth hormone. And that's one of the main hormones that influences our growth and our recovery. As we begin to age, our sleep goes down. So now these infants are going from sleeping 16 hours to now 14 to 10 hours. In adulthood, the recommendation is roughly about 7 to 8 hours. Some sleep agencies or I guess organizations will push as high as 9 hours. And then into older age, that need for sleep, whether it's a biological or not. I'm not entirely sure what influences that yet, but that need for sleep is much lower. Like our older populations, think of the 60s and 70s, they wake up after 4 to 5 hours and they're alert. They're ready to go for their day. But in the middle of the day, it's not uncommon for the older population to nap at some point. So they're still, I guess you can argue they're still getting their 8 hours, but just broken up into two different sleep bouts. That part of like the geriatric or I guess the 60-plus-year-old population and their need for sleep and the role that sleep plays in them, just got to that section on this book here. So let's tune back in about a month and I can give you an update on that one.
Awesome.
That would be handy, especially, because we do work into 65 here.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
that population definitely has relevance to
Mm.
us for sure, for sure. Well, I've got another question. You mentioned, hormones just then, and you said earlier on that you guys take sampling and through bloods and all that sort of stuff. What sort of hormones get affected by the sleep deprivation? How important is it to monitor our hormones, and what sort of effect do they have on our health?
So I created a lecture called Hormone Health for the Firefighter. And there are a long list of hormones that get influenced with the life of a firefighter because of the sleep depth influence. Now, to make this our lecture, I'll give you the short version of it, is through let's say an average Joe, a regular civilian diurnal who goes to bed at night, wakes up in the morning. The cortisol wave, if you will, is what wakes me up in the morning is this big spike in cortisol. I want that big spike. And it peaks sometime in the morning and then it slowly starts to decrease throughout the rest of the day. And towards the end of the night, my cortisol levels are near the low end. And that's when I'm getting ready for bed. And my cortisol levels staying relatively low while I'm in bed, and then it spikes back up, and that's when I wake up. So that is the healthy cortisol response. Sure, when there's these stressors throughout the day, that wave of cortisol going down does have a little spike, and they can have these little small peaks throughout the day, but overall, it follows this pattern here. So now throw the firefighter on this cortisol curve is sure they have that spike in the morning that wakes them up and they're running their calls throughout the day, no big deal because this is the time that us humans we should be operating and ambulating in. But at night when they're ready to go to bed, the human body's ready to go to bed, then you get toned out once, two times, three times. Throw the anticipation response in there, and although you're not getting toned out, you're still not getting good sleep. So this whole phase of where your body should be fending off cortisol, it's staying elevated in you. So this elevation in cortisol, what repercussions does that have? So this is where we start seeing that chronic elevation in cortisol can have influences on your metabolic health, your cardiovascular health, your immunological health. So that from a cortisol perspective, it starts to influence all those other three phases there. If we just look at your metabolic health there, now actually if we look at the whole picture together and then throw in the other hormone that every male is concerned with, or at least of interest with, is testosterone. And we know that there's this, it's not a causative relationship between cortisol and testosterone, meaning cortisol goes up, therefore testosterone goes down, but it's a very strong relationship. So a good portion of the time as cortisol goes up chronically, testosterone will be depleted. There are plenty of occasions where cortisol goes up and testosterone goes up, but that's a different conversation. If we talk about it just in the lens of a firefighter who is chronically elevated in their cortisol levels, then what impact is this having on their other areas of health, which is, let's say, testosterone hormonal panel, their metabolic health, their cardiovascular health? When we start looking into that perspective, there is now with sleep depth, cortisol is elevated because sleep deprivation is a thing. Ghrelin, your hunger hormone, the hormone that's telling you you're hungry, eat, feed me, that is also elevated. So that's increasing your caloric consumption from just sleep depth and stress, cortisol. So now we're stress eating. So how often have you guys come back from that first, second, or third wake up and you guys are eating a bowl of ice cream, a burrito, or you guys are cooking a full on lunch or dinner plate at 3, 4 in the morning? I hear this story more often than not. So then, with a chronic excess consumption of calories over a long period of time, my body fat starts to go up. When my body fat starts to go up, then what influence does that have on my cholesterol? We can argue that it's going to negatively impact my cholesterol. It's going to have a negative impact on my blood pressure. So then we start going down that path there. Now, from a testosterone side, is we secrete a lot of our testosterone and our growth hormone during stages of sleep. So if this is now chronically disrupted, the everyday firefighter, their testosterone production capabilities is now compromised. To what degree it's compromised, that's a different story. But for the average male, your test levels are going to peak and spike through puberty. That they're going to stay relatively plateaued up to maybe 25, they're going to spike up to like the age of 25. They stay plateaued up to the age of 35, 37, into your late 30s, and especially into your early 40s. Testosterone begins to decline roughly about 1 to 2% per year for the everyday average male. These are the males who are not sleep deprived. Put a firefighter in there who's aging and sleep deprived. So then the rate of decline is going to be much, much quicker. So cortisol remains elevated chronically. Testosterone now remains suppressed, or not suppressed, it's suppressed, and rate of decline of natural production is also being compromised. You start seeing how the firefighter starts to age at a quicker rate compared to their civilian counterpart. And so these firefighters, unfortunately, they have higher levels of blood pressure, higher levels of cholesterol, higher levels of body fat compared to your general population. And this is an unfortunate cocktail of problems, of health problems for the firefighter. So you see how it comes right back to the main culprit of a lot of health problems for the firefighter is sleep deprivation.
Once again, that's the central tenet is sleep, isn't it? Because that was the question I was going to ask you is how do we address this hormonal imbalance? And is it simply better sleep?
So the way that we can naturally improve testosterone, this is not using pharmaceuticals, right? No medical intervention, is get better sleep, lose some body fat, lift some heavy weights, consume a high protein diet. And that outside of that, there's very little magic. Supplements, sure. If you're deficient in magnesium and vitamin D, then you can use those to help increase your testosterone levels. If you're not deficient in them, then those supplements won't do much for your test levels. There's a supplement that I posted about maybe a week, 2 weeks ago called Tongat Ali that has shown to improve test levels in low testosterone males or hypogonadal males. So if you're already deficient in test, then this supplement may help. If you're not deficient in test, then the supplement will probably have a small effect, if any. So these are all things that move the needle very, very little. The things that move the needle dramatically is better sleep, lift some heavy weights, lose some body fat. So you want to get in the body fat range of roughly 15% is a healthy. Sub 18% would be ideal. And that really is the formula for it. Now, as we have spoken about the past 80 minutes of how many health challenges a firefighter has and how much out of their control it really is, you can see why many firefighters are at least having interest in medical interventions, so pharmaceutical interventions. Myself as an individual and our program, our health and wellness program, we don't necessarily encourage nor discourage the use of pharmaceuticals. It's something that you have to discuss seriously with your physician. Our job on this end is to simply just educate. I don't want to persuade you to do it, nor persuade you against it. That'd be more of indoctrination. And I just want to educate you instead of that one. So I want to tell you what all the pros are and then what all the cons are, and then you guys make your best decision on if pharmaceuticals are a worthwhile intervention for you, knowing the challenges that are ahead of you in your career. And that takes us down a whole another rabbit hole from there.
Yeah, and obviously in conjunction with your treating physician as well, have those discussions um, with any pharmaceutical intervention, I should say. On that, Daniel, within your program and your education, what recommendations do you give for firefighters getting these hormone levels checked? Is this something that needs to be or should be done regularly? Is it something that should be done early in someone's career throughout it, or is it more important at the back end? What's your sort of stance
So
on that?
I would tell the firefighter is get your hormonal panel, get all your blood work, as many labs as you guys can get done as early as you can. If you can do it in your 20s, go for it because that is your baseline. And when you are 40 and you're just getting your blood work done, or at least a comprehensive panel done, is that normal for you? We don't know if we don't have a baseline. So if you're 40 and your cholesterol has showed high and your T levels are low, is that do you just have normally high cholesterol because genetics, because of, or is it lifestyle? Did you always have poor cholesterol? But we don't know because you never did your blood work in your 20s. So if for whoever's listening, and if whether you're 20 or 40 or 50, is get your blood work done. How often to do it? That becomes, unfortunately, this becomes a question of finances. One, is your insurance going to cover you to get a comprehensive blood workup done semi-annually? And if no, then are you willing to front the cost out of pocket? So that's the unfortunate reality on this end. If it was up to me, then sure, do it twice a year. Get your full metabolic panel, your full blood work done twice a year. Your gut health, your brain health, cholesterol, metabolic, hormonal, sexual health, all these different things, so we can have a good pulse on how this is trending on a year-to-year basis. And now these changes in T levels, cortisol, cholesterol, they are going to be influenced with your seasonal lifestyle. So if you're getting your blood work done in the winter versus the summer, at least for somebody who lives on the coast, and this is me speaking like almost from a personal perspective, is the individuals who live more like on the coastal cities, we have higher levels of health. And this is just data proven here compared to those who live more in the inland. So those who are trying to get summer ready, beach ready, then if I'm my lower levels of body fat, then I'm probably going to have better levels of cholesterol, better levels of T level, better hormonal panels closer to my summer compared to my winter months. So that's just that seasonal lifestyle influence that could play a role in it. Take that out of it and take that influence out of it, and now you have a good understanding of how your internal health has been evolving as you've been aging. And then as if anything ever comes out of your reference ranges, then you can say, hey, this is normal for me, or no, something's up here. Let's begin investigating.
I think we get on top of it early then,
Mm.
rather than waiting for late stage symptomology to appear.
Absolutely.
You mentioned before 30, was it 30% have wellness programs over there in the States and 70% don't?
The exact number is like 73, let's say 75%. I don't know the exact number. Let's say 75% of fire departments do not have a wellness program.
Yep. So
So
knowing that,
25% do.
okay, and that 25% you've said through your data sets, show far better health outcomes for their members. How do we address that disparity? How do we get more departments and more agencies and organizations on board with implementing programs and investing on the front end for their personnel?
So it's a big challenge. Unfortunately, it comes down to budget. Is if the fire department doesn't have the money to either contract a year-round wellness program, can they sponsor a talk? Let's say we get someone like Daniel to come out there and just give a talk on hormones and just raise some awareness. That is one tiny little step in that direction. Let's say that there's no money for that either. Then it's, oh, hey, let's set some fitness benchmarks. Let's not even call it standards because we can't enforce them, especially here in the US. You can't really enforce a fitness standard for a multitude of reasons. But let's say, hey, firefighter, a healthy profile would be, can you do 40 push-ups? Can you do 10 pull-ups? Can you have a VO2 max of 42? Here are all the tests that you guys can run on your own, whether when you guys are training, on duty, off duty, and how close do you come to this? And make it more of like this competitive like environment is station 1 versus station 3, who has a healthier crew, or my engineers versus my captains, or my, you guys get the point from there, is how do we motivate healthier this healthier desire in the everyday firefighter. Let's say that can't work for whatever the reason is, because I'm sure we can come up with an argument as to why we can't implement it. That's where the birth of my Instagram account came from. Is looked at our data and says, "Hey, we have a healthier firefighter, knowing all the challenges that other fire departments and non-wellness program areas have." So let me say that again. The fire departments that are within wellness programs, they are healthier compared to the departments that don't have a wellness program. So these departments without a wellness program, where do they go for education? Where do they go for information? And they're going to the YouTubes and the TikToks and the Instagrams, and some of that information may or may not come from a credible source. Let's say it does come from a credible source. It's coming from the Andrew Hubermans, the Peter Attias of the world. These are very well educated, well studied individuals. But that information that they're putting out, how well does that translate over to the firefighter? Because the firefighter is a different breed. You guys are a completely different population, as we've discussed over the past 90 minutes, is you guys have an on-duty and off-duty life. That on-duty life is governed by sleep debt. So then, although the Hubermans and the Attias and other respected individuals like that, they talk about hormonal health and metabolic and cardiovascular health, but how do these interventions, these challenges, how do they relate to the firefighter? That's where I felt there was a huge gap and a big need, and I wanted to start my Instagram to serve that gap there. So then a lot of my research that I was doing throughout my dissertation, and this is not research like studies that I'm conducting. This is papers that I'm reading, and I'm reading this is like shit. The firefighter needs to know this, but the ones who are reading this research, they're not the firefighters. They're just other researchers, other scientists, other academics. So it never gets down to the everyday firefighter. And that's where I said, I have to start posting this in a bite-sized way that the everyday member can read and just gain one or two nuggets of information. And this compounded over however long I continue doing this, hopefully I start motivating a healthier change. Because now the firefighters and departments that don't have wellness programs, they're still getting the same info that I'm delivering to the departments I work with, but they're just getting it through their phone now. So I've been doing just these standalone posts for almost maybe I started like in February of this year, and I started kind of like teasing the lectures that I do. I do like screenshots or I take a picture of my slides, and I get DMs is where do I get access to this lecture? And I have to start recording these things and putting them out so that the everyday firefighter can get access to this information for free. So this is where this setup came from. Is all right. Let me invest in a decent mic. Let me make my background a little pretty so I can have some production value to it. And slowly I can start having hopefully some positive impact on the fire community.
That's awesome. Well, I
Yeah.
can say that it's definitely impacted myself personally because that's how I came across you through your Instagram account. And those, you know, like you said, the information is relevant. It's contextual for firefighters and it's easy to understand too. So I absolutely think you are having an impact. And I'd definitely be keen if you start recording stuff and putting it out more broadly.
That's next on my list.
Well, mate, once again,
Awesome.
thank you very much for your time and knowledge. We will be putting your Instagram page in the show notes to this if anyone wants to get in touch with you. If anyone does listen to this and they want to get some more information, is that the main way to get in touch with you, through Instagram?
Yeah, so I'm pretty active on Instagram. I have a LinkedIn. I check it maybe once a month, if that. Um, and yeah, if you have questions, follow, leave a comment, DM me, and I respond. Up to this date, I have responded to every single DM. I don't necessarily do it in a timely fashion, but I will respond to you.
One more quick question actually on that. Are you getting much pushback at all from some of the stuff you put out? Perhaps just from like a culture, or, that's not the way we do things, or they don't like some of the information you're putting out. Are you getting any sort of pushback, or is it mostly positive?
Undoubtedly, it's all positive, and it's all positive. It's encouragement. It's a thank you. It's appreciate the work you're doing. Let's say for every 100 DMs I get one or two saying, that's not going to work. Nah, we've tried that. It's not worth it. Um, or like if sometimes in the comments you can read through certain posts and you'll get the naysayer on it saying, this study only had 14 subjects. It means nothing. Um, you get comments of saying fake news on some things of, I don't know, when I'm talking in opposition of like something like nicotine. Um, so you'll have like those commenters and DMers like that. The post that comes out tomorrow maybe is more in line with the question you're asking, is resilient s- m- how resilient certain members of the fire service have been to embracing change. So look out for that post tomorrow. It should be posting sometime in the morning. Um, so that is more of the pushback I get, not necessarily on my personal page, but in the fire service as a whole.
Right. Well, that's cool. It's good to hear that it's overwhelmingly
Positive.
positive. That's awesome. And,
Mm.
hopefully, like you said, people picking up those little bits of knowledge are able to take that, share that, implement that, and hopefully resulting in a healthier profession.
Yeah, that's the goal. I appreciate your guys' support. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thanks again for your time, mate. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, please show your support by subscribing, liking, and rating the podcast on your listening and social media platforms. We are always looking to improve what we do. If you have feedback, suggestions for further guests, topics, or would like to be a guest yourself, please contact us via Instagram.
Stop the scene.